Guys, Savage Worlds Adventure Edition is out, which means I get to finally talk about it. Okay, before we go into the nitty-gritty of what's new in this edition versus deluxe, I want to do two disclaimers. The first is I'm filming this before everybody's gotten the book. Now, what that means is I actually have an Aces copy. This is a confidential copy, but I'm not releasing this info until after the full version's out. What this means is this book is about 99% identical to what everyone else is going to get. One of those key differences brings into part 2, which is I'm not going to be covering chases in detail here. The Aces copy, the first copy I got, had version 1 of chases, the first preview. As soon as version 2 came out, I realized, oh, these rules are still very much in flux. We got a version 3 before the Kickstarter ended. I'm not going to go into super deep detail of chases. I'm actually not going into super deep detail of every single mechanic. There's a whole series of videos coming for that. But I want to cover that because while chases are new, I'm not 100% certain version 3 is even exactly what's in the book you might have or be thinking about picking up. So with that, let's get into it. Okay, so the first part to cover is basically all the changes that are happening in character creation. On top of the fact that there is now kind of a guideline of order of operation to build a character, which, yeah, super helpful. It's always kind of been go in whatever order. Now they say, do this step, then this, then this, and this for character creation. So much simpler. But that I'm going to use as kind of the guideline of what I'm going to talk about. So the first real major change is races. Not only are there more races in this core book than the deluxe core book, there's more race options. If you've noticed, a lot of the books lately have either copied over the race tables from the Sci-Fi Companion, or they've been saying, you know, you can use any of the stuff from the Sci-Fi Companion. Basically, those Sci-Fi Companion big, long list of options to build races, all of those from the Sci-Fi Companion, they're now moved into the core book as well. So I'm not going over every single racial change, like every positive feature you can take, every negative feature you can take. Instead, I'm going to say it's mostly what's in the Sci-Fi Companion, but now it's all in the core book. So just the core book alone, you're going to have a lot more tools to build races. On top of that, there's a lot of really cool races. I'll probably do an entire video dedicated to the new races that are featured in the core book. Moving on from that, we then go into skills, and skills got a huge shakeup. Okay, first and foremost, we knew athletics was coming. We knew swimming and climbing and throwing were all getting lumped into an athletic skill. That was part of the reveals. In fact, I'm not going to cover too much of the stuff we already revealed in previews. Instead, I'm going to throw that in a card here, boop, that's going to link to a video I did right at the beginning of the Kickstarter launch that was a collection of all the reveals. Rather than going over all that stuff we knew was coming, in case you're new to this, just check that card out. It'll have everything. But on top of that, some things we didn't see coming is tracking is gone. The tracking skill got lumped into survival, which actually works really, really well. We saw thievery is now a skill, which really helps. This is another one of those kind of came from Flash Gordon. No one's super surprised. I think some of the big ones are performance is now a core skill. Again, not a huge surprise, but it was on the fence. Intimidate and taunt did not leave. I'm going to talk about those in a second. And streetwise is gone. In fact, there's going to be a graphic right over here that has all of this breakdown. And it says streetwise is now an edge. Well, that has to do with the new networking mechanic, which is essentially what the streetwise skill used to be, but now it's a more detailed and refined mechanic that can use either persuasion or intimidate and has two different methods giving two different outcomes. Now with this gives intimidate something to do. One of the worries I had for the new edition when we saw tests, again, not getting too much into stuff we already knew was coming, but tests let you use any skill to kind of do what a test of will used to be. And test of wills used to only be intimidate and taunt. That was what the skills were for. Well, intimidate got some love. Intimidate now has some major mechanical benefits. There's also, with the removal of charisma, edges that benefit persuasion and edges that benefit intimidate. Now with that, one of the things I found really, really interesting is taunt didn't get the same love with mechanics. You don't use taunt for networking. You don't use taunt for any of that. Where taunt got a lot of love is taunt is kind of the gateway skill for a ton of social skills. Taunt can now be used so that you can do social tests on entire groups of characters, which I love. There's always been an edge or two. One of the main ones is in Deadlands that lets you intimidate groups and stuff. Taunt now lets you do that in the core rules. But one of my favorites is Taunt now has an edge that not only when you taunt someone, they can be distracted or vulnerable on a success and shaken with a raise. If you get a raise, an ally who is present who may be distracted or vulnerable no longer is. You can use taunt to take conditions off of your friends. Essentially, if you want like a D&D kind of bard character, a person who is basically magic with their words rather than actual magic, taunt is where it's at. It gives you a ton of edges, so you do have to build into it and kind of take your time, but you can do amazing things in no magic settings, in magical settings. All of that, so cool. Speaking of edges, and we're just gonna lump hindrances together. We're gonna do edges and hindrances. Almost all of them have changed. I would feel very comfortable saying 90% or 9 out of 10 of the edges and hindrances are rewritten in some way. So if you're converting characters over, reread every edge and every hindrance your character has, because a lot of them have major mechanical changes. There's also a lot more edges and hindrances. I'm gonna be real honest. I had notes that gave me the number of edges in Deluxe versus the number of edges in Adventures, the number of hindrances in Deluxe versus the number of hindrances in Adventures. But the raw numbers don't matter, because even the edges and hindrances that are there are so much better and so much more well balanced. You can definitely tell that in this section more than anywhere that this is a ground up rewrite of Savage Worlds. Yes, everything's compatible, but this is easily the biggest change to the Savage Worlds edition ever. Now with this, I'm not going into every single edge and every single hindrance that's changed. I'm going to be doing videos on a lot of this, but even then I don't think I can devote one video to every edge that has changed. There's just too much. I'll probably do like my favorites of edges and my favorites of hindrances and stuff like that. But one, to give you a really good example, I want to bring up, I'm going to throw it up right here, is the elderly hindrance. Because this was always one of those really funny hindrances. Because in Deluxe Edition, it lowered your strength and your vigor by 1 die type to a minimum of a D4, and you could never raise them. In exchange, you got 5 free skill points that could go to any smarts-based skill. So if you're already going to play a smarts-based character and you knew you weren't going to have physical attributes really, people just took elderly. Because if you had a D4 strength or a D4 vigor, you were fine. It didn't actually hurt you. The new rewrite, I gotta get used to that. The new rewrite of that instead doesn't reduce the die type. Instead, it is a global -1 to strength, vigor, and agility checks. All your physical stats now. Because there was also that thing if you could play the old guy but still have really good agility, so really good fighting, it doesn't affect your dice. Instead, it's a -1. So even if you take a D4, you're gonna feel it. But the limit of you can't raise these attributes anymore is also gone. So you can play this elderly retired hero who is already kind of strong and got back into the fray for whatever reason, and it's a new story, and they can still improve. It opens things up, and you still get those 5 skill points. Speaking of that, I kind of glossed over it in skills. Game Geeks covered this a little. I do want to touch on it. The official rule is now you get 12 skill points. But there's also a setting rule in the back that says any modern setting, you get 15. Honestly, I find this one kind of weird. I feel like the setting rule's there so characters can easily convert. Because when it comes to Savage Worlds, especially the pinnacle settings, I'm going to be wiping the list of, here are some of our third party and our settings that they used on the Kickstarter. Look at how many of those are modern. Now, this also might be your standard of modern. For me, anything post casing in the bullets, not just flintlock gunpowder, but anything where a shotgun is an option, so Wild West and beyond easily, is modern. At least modern enough to justify those extra 3 skill points. That's most of their stuff. This is kind of one of those of like, I feel weird about this. Also bringing in with this, it is one of those previews, the cards up there, it's not going to ding again, were the core skills, which are skills you already get at a D4. And there were 5 of them. I was doing the math of, I wonder if they're going to do 10 skill points instead of 15, because you're essentially prepaying 5 of the points. They basically split the difference between 15 that you used to get and 10 if they auto-spent, and went in the mid-range for 12. But if you don't like that, there's a setting rule in the back that just says, yeah, just do 15. Moving on from only things that affect character creation, we're going to go into setting rules. Now, this affects your bennies as well as things like critical failures or snake eyes. Now, I'm not going to discuss every single setting rule offered in the book. There's a ton. Instead, I'm going to discuss the setting rules that were in Deluxe that are now core to the game. These are considered automatic. First and foremost, what used to be considered the Joker's Wild Rule, one of the most popular setting rules, so many people used it. Essentially, if somebody drew a Joker, everybody got a Benny, is now just a rule. Now, if somebody draws a Joker, everyone gets a Benny. It's just part of the core rules. On top of that, there used to be a lot of confusion with critical failures versus snake eyes, which I get. I think it was a confusing piece of writing because the core rules had a mechanic called snake eyes. If you rolled a 1 on your skill die and you rolled a 1 on your wild die, you got snake eyes. Something bad happens to you. However, you could still spend bennies and reroll out of it. But you rolled double 1, something bad happens is what most people know of as a critical failure, especially if they're coming from other games. They also had a setting rule called critical failures. And the only thing the critical failure setting rule had was when you roll double 1s, you can't Benny out of it. There was a lot of confusion about, something bad happens on double 1s as part of the setting rule. Double 1s is a critical failure. No, double 1s is a snake eyes. Got rid of all of it. Now, if you roll double 1s, it is considered a critical failure and you cannot Benny out of it. Just part of the game. That's how it is. One thing I found very, very interesting with this, though, and it's a small addition they made, is now extras, if they are spellcasters and roll a 1 on their skill die, it counts as a critical failure for backlash. Because they kind of rewrote how backlash works with critical failures. It's no longer just a 1 on the skill die, but it's a critical failure. So there's none of this, the wild die is the only way you can critically fail. Magic users now can technically critically fail even if they're an extra. It's one of those small rules. Honestly, I didn't even catch that little addition until about my 3rd time reading through of this book. There's a lot of these subtle changes. In fact, I'm going to bring up another subtle change, one that an ace didn't even notice, where I was like, hey, isn't this kind of weird? It's like, I didn't even notice that, and I've read the book a bunch of times. If you think athletics was already powerful because you can use it in combat, athletics is for throwing, athletics is for grappling, athletics is for climbing, athletics is for swimming. Well, athletics is used for one more thing, and it's really easy to overlook. Now, if you are on hold with your turn and you want to interrupt someone, it is no longer an opposed agility check. It is an opposed athletics check. I'm actually fine with this because in the skills or in the changes section, they bring up how there's this fundamental difference between attributes and skills now. And it's essentially attributes are passive things. Skills are based on things you actively choose to do. And interrupting is an active choice. Now, they also say there's always exceptions, but I get where they're coming at with that. Now, speaking of bennies, there's a few more uses that have kind of been leaked and come out, especially with the Wild Cards live play of ETU. You can spend bennies to re-roll unless it's a critical failure. You can now spend bennies to re-roll damage. What used to be the blood and guts rule. Now that is just, it's part of the game. I think this very much simplifies the game for new players of pretty much everything the player rolls, they can spend a Benny to re-roll, with the exception of a running die, because really any table rolls should be on the GM's side anyways. So that actually really cleans up the game. There's also a rule where you can spend a Benny to get a new initiative card, but you have to spend the Bennies before anyone has started their turn. I'm not a big fan of this rule. Now, it's one of those where I'm just not going to use it, and I'm not going to like push players into using it. But if a player chooses to do it and does it before anyone takes a turn, I'll let them. But I just feel like for a game focused on Fast Furious fun, this is the one change in Adventurers Edition where I'm like, this doesn't make it faster. Because now you have the card dealing turn section of a turn. Then you have everyone looks at their cards and decides if they want to spend a Benny for more cards before you get into everyone's turns. I feel like it's adding an extra step that doesn't need to be there, which goes against Fast Furious fun. But again, it's only if you choose to spend the Benny to do it. So if no one chooses to spend the Benny, it doesn't matter. On top of all of this, there is another rule. I found it hilarious when I read this because my friend Eric, who is running the Wise Guys setting, had this as a setting rule in Wise Guys. And I don't know if they saw it in Wise Guys and went, we need to add this to our game or what. But you need to know in the rules now, if you roll and say you fail or you want to get a better roll, like you want to get a raise, and you choose to spend a Benny because it wasn't a critical failure, so you can spend a Benny. You choose to spend a Benny and you re-roll. If any of your re-rolls are a critical failure, those double ones, if any of them are a critical failure, the entire roll becomes a critical failure now. I actually love this. I loved it in Wise Guys when I got lucky enough to play test that and do all of that. And I love it here because it means every time a player spends a Benny, they're gambling. There is a small bit of risk that it can be worse. Now, I could see a lot of people being angry of like, Benny should only ever make things better. It's a risk reward. And honestly, the risk of a critical failure of double ones, even on a D4, is very low. So I'm fine with that. It's a very slim risk, but it adds a lot more excitement in the game. And it's definitely something you need to keep track of because it's kind of a big change to the dynamic of how the game works. Okay, so now we get into maybe my favorite part of the new edition, which is powers. So if you saw Flash Gordon, or if you read the Flash Gordon book, I should say, you already have a good idea of how powers work in the new edition. And I very much felt like that whole section was, this is a preview of what's coming in the new edition. It's just not in the slim portion of the Flash Gordon book. It said, this is officially new edition stuff. And basically what it is trappings are now very slimmed down. The trapping is kind of like the damage type. It can narratively mean some things, and they have some stuff about how trappings can interact with things like lightning on someone in water. The GM can determine it does more damage. But there's no solid mechanical tie between trapping and mechanics. I'm kind of with Kurt Weigel on this from Game Geeks, where he said he feels like he wishes trappings had more weight. I'm torn on it because I do wish trappings had a little more meat to them now, but that meat is now just shifted to the modifiers. And modifiers are things like armor piercing, lasting damage, all kinds of things you can add on to any power for additional costs. Now, the big difference is when you pick a trapping, you're locked into it. Modifiers you add whenever you cast. I'll probably do a whole thing about how I adapt ETU to this edition, because I think modifiers will just be part of a ritual, just like trappings are pre-built. But that's huge. That lets powers be way more flexible. Now, on top of that, another one of those things, if you don't read the whole book, you'll miss it. There's always been this discussion of, what if I want casters who can change trappings each time they cast it? Like, I just take bolt, but I want to be able to throw a firebolt or a lightning bolt or an icicle. Now, by the core rules, you take bolt multiple times. You take bolt with the fire trapping, you take bolt with the ice trapping, you take bolt with the lightning trapping. However, in Adventure Edition, there's another option, and it is the Wizard Edge. Again, I'm not going to talk about every edge, but the Wizard Edge I love, because they got rid of the whole every raise reduces the casting cost by 1 power point, blah, 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 blah. And why I love that they got rid of that is it means in settings that don't use the PowerPoints rules, or that use the no PowerPoints rule, I should say, the Wizard Edge never works. It doesn't do anything, which means what's technically your like higher magic settings can't have wizards, at least those with the Wizard Edge. I mean, anybody can call themselves a wizard, but you see an edge called wizard and you want to be a wizard, you'll want that edge. Well, now that has nothing to do with how much the power costs after you roll. Instead, wizards can change their trapping on the fly. You still have the one trapping locked to the power when you took it, but you can change it to any other trapping you choose for the cost of 1 more power point. And I love this because in the no PowerPoints rules, where instead you take a casting modifier equal to half the power points of the power, odd numbered powers bump up 1 to an even, which means the modifier goes up. Even numbered powers bump up 1 to an odd, so the modifier doesn't change. Which, while you're like, well, then they kind of get it for free. You still have to buy the edge, and it actually shows a big difference between even and odd numbered powers. And if you're thinking about things like, well, then I'll just always do the 2 bolt version of bolt, because you used to be able to do casting for 1 point fires 1 bolt, casting for 2 fires 2, casting for 3 fires 3 as an action. Well, with that whole new action economy that you can do the same thing multiple times, bolt doesn't have that anymore. It's now just you either throw a bolt or you throw a big bolt. There's no rapid fire bolt, because with the new rules you could go, I cast 3 bolts as an action, I cast 3 bolts as an action, I cast 3 bolts as an action, and they essentially get 9 attacks. Now it's just 1 bolt. If you want the 3 attacks, you use all 3 of your actions. So it already fits. There's a lot less powers that use even numbered points. So that works. And speaking of power points, oh man, do casters have a leg up in this new edition. Not only with all this new versatility and stuff, you get power points back so much faster. You no longer get back 1 power point per hour. Well, I love the symmetry of 1 to 1. Let's be real honest. In a tabletop game where anyone could say 8 hours passes, unless you have a ticking clock deadline, it's no different than 1 hour passes. In the new edition, casters regain 5 power points per hour, and that is before edges that can let them gain another 5 power points per hour with rapid recharge. Okay, you can throw your spells around like crazy. In fact, I don't actually see a huge need, unless I'm doing a low magic setting with rituals like ETU, of needing the no power points rules anymore. Because at 5 points per hour, I'm not having players that go, I don't care about the ticking clock. I need to wait 10 hours so I'm fully recharged. No, it's, all right, it's been 2 hours. You have 10 points back. If you're really worried, take the rapid recharge edge. In 1 hour, you have 10 points back. That's plenty. Oh, I almost forgot. On top of all of that, there is now just an edge. I want to say it's called Artificer, that lets casters, not just weird scientists, but any caster, make magic items. Now, weird scientists basically automatically get this edge, and that's how they use their gizmos. But any other caster can take the edge, and they can choose to essentially funnel their power points into an item. That item then stores their power points. And I believe, again, the system's still pretty new to me, even though I have a couple months with it. I believe the item regenerates points, but there's trapped in that item. You can't regenerate the points that are in your item until you take them out, and it's locked to a power. But you can essentially choose to basically shave off power points you would get and put them in the items. Which also means once you have Artificer, every time you take the extra power points edge, you can immediately shave those into an item and instead essentially take an edge to have a magic item. So with powers and character creation, all of that out of the way, all things I really expected to see change, we're going to come to a mechanic I did not expect to change. Dramatic tasks have a complete overhaul. First of all, there are now 3 different difficulty levels of dramatic tasks. Simple, I want to say basic, and complex. In a simple dramatic task, you have 3 cards to get 4 successes. In a basic dramatic task, you have 4 cards to get 6 successes. And in a complex dramatic task, you have 5 cards to get 8 successes. Now, this does mean someone can still make a roll, do amazingly, and kind of blow the dramatic task out of the water in first try, but the odds of it happening are much, much lower now with how this is set up. This guarantees at least one of your cards on a simple dramatic task has to be erased, even if you succeed on the others. They still have the -2 from clubs, causes an instant failure, and all of that. I feel like they upped the number of successes because now, with how the support roles and everything work, it's a lot easier for friends to help you build and get bigger bonuses and really help get those successes. Now, on top of that is probably my favorite part, and it's not even a lot of crunch, but I'm so happy it's finally in the game. One of my biggest annoyances with Deluxe was I love dramatic tasks. They are my favorite mechanic in Savage Worlds. And then their example is a dramatic task of defusing a bomb, where a character has to make a notice roll to find the bomb and then repair rolls to disable the bomb. But by the rules they gave us, if they got 5 successes on their notice roll, the bomb's automatically disabled because you just need 5 successes to finish the task. I'm going to throw this one over here. There are now rules for combining multiple skills in a dramatic task. This is all it is. It's a very short mention, but it brings up how you can now basically put a cap on how many successes each of the skills can give, and then those success totals equal your final total. So in their example, you can get 2 successes on the first skill and then you need 3 on the second. If you get 3 successes on the first skill, doesn't matter. You only get 2. You still need to get 3 on the other. I love this. Now they do bring up, this makes dramatic tasks much, much harder. Good. They are dramatic tasks. So also if you're worried about one person making a single roll that just blows the dramatic task out of the water, make it into 2 checks. Guarantee there's at least 2 skills to use with it. This is a game changer for dramatic tasks. Moving on, again, I can't cover every little thing this new edition has to offer, but I want to talk a little bit about creatures because there is a big, huge even change to some of the rules for creatures. First of all, they have a much clearer set of rules for what size number a creature is to qualify as large or as huge. That's just kind of like a rules clarification. The huge game changer is the fact that now large-sized creatures get 1 additional wound. Huge-sized creatures get 2 additional wounds. And this includes extras, which means a large-sized extra still gets a wound before it goes down. A huge-sized extra gets 2 wounds before it goes down. A large wild card has 4, and a huge wild card has 5 wounds. Okay? This means size categories are massively important. All right? I'm not going in every little bit, but everything I've covered right here, I think gives you a good overlook at the new edition, at just how many things have changed. I love this edition. I'm so happy I finally get to talk about this edition. In fact, if there's something in the book that I haven't covered yet, especially if you think I hadn't covered it in enough detail, don't worry, because Savage Worlds for Beginners is coming back, guys, and I'm going to start working on videos covering all of these mechanics. I'm going to do in-depth dramatic task videos. I will eventually do the chase rules once I feel like it's the final version and I have a good grasp. It's coming. I'm going to do videos on my favorite new edges. I'm going to do my videos on my favorite changed edges. Same with hindrances for both. I'm doing it all, guys. But for now, I'll catch you later. Bye. Hey guys, if you like this video, check out more stuff here if you're new to the GM table. Anyways, I'm going to read off my patrons first. So I got a new patron right now, Randy Wapperon. I got Tommy Allen, who's been a longtime patron. Both of them are executive producers, but I also have a producer called Clyde Clark, who's been helping me out too. They're my big ones. I got a couple other smaller followers, but they're high enough where I gotta mention them, and I'm happy to mention them. As I've said, if you're new to the GM table, check out some of our videos over here. Check out the Patreon below if you like the stuff we do and you want to help out, and I'll catch you guys next time.